What's going on, everybody? Kalipis Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Samsung Galaxy A04s and the TCL 30XL. Now, as always, if you do end up wanting to learn more about either phone individually, definitely check out the description, where I will be linking to several other videos about them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Samsung Galaxy A04s, we're getting a 6.5-inch 90Hz PLS LCD display with a 720p resolution, a PPI of 270, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. With the TCL 30XL, we're getting a really large 6.82-inch LCD display with a 720p resolution as well, a PPI of 270, and a 20.5:9 aspect ratio. So when it comes to image quality, the displays are pretty much the same. Both of them, despite having 720p resolutions, do have at least decently sharp images, and in general, I would say things look pretty good. So of course, compared to a phone that has a 1080p display, they're not going to look nearly as good, but I feel like if you're watching the occasional video every now and then, with either phone, you should get an at least decent experience. For image quality, the only real difference here is that with the A04s, again, we are getting a 90Hz refresh rate versus a standard 60Hz with the TCL 30XL. Really not going to make a huge difference, but just keep in mind it will make the movement on the screen a little bit faster and smoother with the A04s, making the phone in general feel a bit more premium. But again, aside from that, the difference isn't really huge. Now, aside from the image quality, when it comes to size and dimensions, this is where the TCL 30XL does have a pretty big advantage. At 6.82 inches versus 6.5, it is clearly significantly larger, which does tend to be a good thing if you're using your phone a lot. And in addition to this, with the 20.5:9 aspect ratio versus again 20:9 with the A04s, the TCL 30XL has a slightly taller and more narrow form factor. So if you're doing something like watching videos in landscape mode, for example, with these dimensions you are going to get a slightly more immersive experience. And if you're doing something like browsing the web, using social media, anything really that involves scrolling, with the TCL 30XL, you'll be able to fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. Now, when it comes to the dimensions, the difference really isn't that huge, but I would say the main thing here is that again, the TCL 30XL is larger, so if you are going to be on your phone a lot, then this is definitely something to keep in mind. Now for storage, both phones have 64GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, so definitely a good amount of storage here. But keep in mind, with the Samsung Galaxy A04s, this phone is not officially launched in the US, and while I believe the TCL 30XL is technically not really offered by carriers either, so with either phone you're probably going to get it factory unlocked anyway. I just wanted to point this out because with the A04s, if this phone eventually does reach US carriers, it might and honestly probably will have a bit less storage. But again, as of right now, these two phones in my hand do have 64GB, which in my opinion maybe isn't a ton of storage, but it is definitely still a reasonable amount. So while if you're someone who's constantly downloading apps and games and stuff like that, you are probably going to want to get something with at least 128. For the average user, as long as you're mindful of what you're putting on your phone and you make sure to use that microSD card expansion whenever you can, either phone will have plenty of storage for you. Now for security features, both phones do have Face Unlock, and they also both have fingerprint scanners. With the A04s, it's right here on the power key, and with the TCL 30XL, it's right here on the back. But starting with the A04s, let's give them a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the TCL 30XL. There we go, one more time. And there we go, I forgot how loud that is. So as you can see, both fingerprint scanners worked real well, real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And again, remember, both phones also do have Face Unlock, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setups here, with the Samsung Galaxy A04s, up front, we got a 5-megapixel selfie camera, then on the back, we got a triple camera setup, with a 50-megapixel main camera, a 2-megapixel macro camera, and a 2-megapixel depth sensing camera. With the TCL 30XL, we got a 13-megapixel selfie camera, then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 50-megapixel main camera, a 5-megapixel ultra-wide camera, a 2-megapixel macro camera, and a 2-megapixel depth sensing camera. So in general, when it comes to camera features, both phones are pretty good, but of course, the TCL 30XL having an ultra-wide camera does have a bit of an advantage. So if you want to get those wider angles, definitely keep this in mind. But if you don't really care about that feature, then of course, the Samsung Galaxy A04s is going to be completely fine, and at least this phone does have a macro camera, so that's always good. And when it comes to photo quality, I do think both phones take really good photos, so honestly, for more average daily use, especially considering these are more entry-level devices, either phone is actually going to be a pretty good choice. Now to give you an idea of what they can do, first, here's some pictures taken with the Samsung Galaxy A04s. In general, especially considering this is pretty much Samsung's cheapest phone, I definitely think the camera quality here is actually really good. Sure, on one hand, obviously, if taking photos on your phone is really your thing, then you're probably going to want to spend a bit more money and get something actually high-end, but of course, If you spend more money on a camera, you're obviously going to get better quality. That's really just how it works. But I feel like with this phone, it really just goes to show that for the average everyday user, you really don't need to spend $1,000 on a phone to get a good camera. Because I feel like with this phone, for even stuff like Instagram, where you really do want good photos, this phone will get the job done for that kind of thing. So again, unless you want an ultra wide camera, or maybe just insanely good photos, in which case you're probably not going to get a phone in this price range anyway. For everyone else, I do think the Samsung Galaxy A04s will definitely get the job done. And then here's some pictures taken with the TCL 30XL. Again, same kind of thing. I definitely think these pictures are really usable, but I will say I personally feel like the Samsung Galaxy A04s is still a little bit better. Not really by much, but if you do want the better photo quality between the two, I would personally go with the A04s. But that being said, of course, for the average user, the TCL 30XL is still going to get the job done just fine. So again, overall, if you are looking for a more affordable phone with a good camera, either phone here is going to be a perfectly fine choice, but it really comes down to this. If you want the better general photo quality between the two, I would recommend going with the Samsung Galaxy A04s. I feel like with this phone, the pictures look a little bit sharper, more interesting, and the colors just look more alive. But on the other hand, the TCL 30XL is really not that far behind, because for what it is, the photo quality is still really good. And again, this phone does have an ultra-wide camera too, so if you do want that feature, then definitely go with the TCL 30XL. Now, when it comes to RAM and processor, with the Samsung Galaxy A04s, this phone has 4GB of RAM with the Exynos 850 processor. With the TCL 30XL, this phone is getting 6GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio A25. Now, between the two, when it comes to overall performance, there's really not that much of a difference. I mean, I guess in my experience, the TCL 30XL is maybe slightly faster, but again, in general, you're really not going to notice a significant difference. So between these two phones, I personally wouldn't base a decision on performance. That being said though, as really entry-level phones, neither of them is really particularly fast. But despite this, for more basic activities like web browsing, light social media use, and maybe watching the occasional video every now and then, again, either phone will get the job done just fine. So if you are looking for an affordable basic phone for more essential activities, you're really not going to go wrong with either here. Now, as always, I did run benchmark tests on these phones using Geekbench 5, and here are the results I got. So again, really not much of a difference. I guess technically on paper, the TCL 30XL did score a little bit higher, and again, in my experience, and this could probably just be in my imagination or something, the TCL 30XL did seem to run a bit smoother, but honestly, in the grand scheme of things, you're really not going to notice a significant difference. But again, for more entry-level phones, I do think these phones are pretty good, and I definitely have seen much slower devices than this. So if you are doing more basic activities, even if you're on your phone a decent amount, I do think for the most part, you are going to get a pretty good experience here. Now for the batteries, both phones do have 5,000 mAh batteries, with the Samsung Galaxy A04s supporting 15W fast charging, and the TCL 30XL supporting 18. Now, this is really not much of a difference. Both phones, in my experience, do have really good charging speeds. Now, of course, if you have an insanely powerful fast charger and you're expecting it to charge from 0 to 100 in 20 minutes, that's not going to happen. But honestly, in this price range, fast charging usually isn't anything crazy anyway. So I would say in general, for the average user, you're really not going to have any problems. And then of course, with 5,000 mAh batteries, these are really large batteries, so you can definitely expect to get great battery life and longevity. So if you're in a situation where maybe you're not always around a charger, but you really need something that's going to last all day, either phone is going to be a great choice for that. And then down the road, as the batteries degrade, of course, as all batteries do, these phones are going to last quite a bit longer than a smaller battery, of course. So if you like to get one phone and keep it for a longer time without having to replace it, then with, again, 5,000 mAh batteries, either phone will be a great choice. As far as the software goes, with the Samsung Galaxy A04s, we are getting Android 13, and knowing Samsung's software support, with this phone, you can also expect to get several other major updates in the future. On the other hand, with the TCL 30XL, this phone does have Android 12, which isn't bad, and there's a chance it might get Android 13 in the future. But honestly, if you really do care about that, I would definitely go for the Samsung Galaxy A04s, because Samsung honestly has pretty much the best software support in the game, at least in this price segment. But if you don't really care about the software that much, then honestly, at this point in 2023, in this price range, most non-Samsung phones have Android 12 anyway. So with the TCL 30XL, it's not really that bad. In addition to this, unfortunately, neither phone has NFC, so if you like to use tap and pay, you are going to have to get something different altogether. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? In general, this is actually kind of a hard one because in a lot of ways, these phones are pretty much the same. And honestly, if you're looking for a really affordable device for more basic activities, you want something that has a really good camera, a decent display, acceptable performance, and a great battery, you're really not going to go wrong with either phone here. That being said though, if you want slightly better photo quality from the camera and better software support, then the Samsung Galaxy A04s will have a bit of an advantage. But if you want a larger display and an ultra-wide camera, then you are going to be happier with the TCL 30XL. But again, in general, if you are looking for an affordable entry-level phone, you're really not going to go wrong with either device here. But this concludes my comparison between the Samsung Galaxy A04s and the TCL 30XL. Again, if you want to learn more about either phone individually, definitely check out the description, where I will be linking to several other videos about them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalibas Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.